Canada's real estate market is on life support. We are seeing major changes and cracks start to show up in the condo market and in the larger cities. The reason why this is very important to pay attention to is because the condo market is basically the entry level home area where we see a lot of decisions being made and where we see a lot of early signs on things and changes to come. And if this trend continues, not only will it be bad for Canada on the whole, it will also potentially lead to an overhaul in what is going on in the market currently. This is something we will need to pay attention to, so let's get into it.
I want to show you something. Cute little condo in Toronto's Harbourfront neighborhood, bustling part of the city. It goes on the market. In the summer of 2022, the sellers put it up for $480,000. It didn't sell. Early 2023, it's back on the market for $460K. No luck. Later that year, posted again at $450K, still nothing, and a few months ago, the sellers tried again at $430,000. No takers. This condo was sitting on the market for more than 400 days without a sale. Right now, in Canada's biggest cities, there's a ton of condos like
Okay, so what we call that in the industry, as you guys know, I'm a real estate agent, but what we call that is chasing the market down. And why that's a bad idea is because now you waited 400 days to sell the property for $60,000 less than what you originally wanted. Okay, so let's just say what you do to avoid that is when you think you can get 480,000 and the market's slow, you probably want to list under 480,000. And I know it sounds not smart because you're maybe leaving some money on the table, but what's worse, an extra 400 days, which would be what? An extra 13, almost 14 months worth of carrying costs. If your carrying cost is $2,200 a month on top of the price that you're losing as you hold it, you never want to be the one chasing the market down. And it's a tough conversation to have as a real estate agent because the clients often go, well, no, I can get so much more for this. If I don't get this, I'm not going to make as much money. And I actually lose a lot of listings over this because I don't like being the agent to hold on to a listing for 400 days. Nobody wins in that scenario. So I prefer to tell them the price up front. They usually get mad and then they list it. And then I see that they chase the market down and then it sells later for a much lower price than we could have got, because in that example, they might have been able to list it at 460 to start with, and it would have sold at 460 back in 2022 instead of, 420, blaze it, in 2024 or whatever that was.
this, struggling to sell. Condo sales in Toronto, for example, haven't been this low since the financial crisis in 2009.
Condo flippers are getting absolutely slaughtered right now.
In majority of these towers, they are half empty.
Nobody wants these condos, folks.
And here we are in the middle of a housing crisis. It's never been harder to get into the market. And so many of these condos spend so much time sitting empty. Why? That studio we just showed you, we're pretty sure an investor bought it, because just a month after it did finally sell for $80K under its original asking price, it was listed for rent.
I think the number one problem is that most of the condos that are listed on the market are investor units.
Investors have really thrown the market out of whack. And when I say investor, I don't want you to think of some, faceless corporation or ultra-wealthy real estate mogul. According to Stats Canada, the typical condo landlord here is actually a, quote, middle-aged, middle-class couple. And for these people, the intent...
Yes, so the reason why I wanted to kind of let him get to that point there is because most people think like, oh, investors are buying all the condos and then it's these giant companies and they're hoarding it all. But no, the average investor is a mom and pop investor who might own one extra condo outside of their building. However, people don't understand these towers, as the way the system is currently set up, are built on the backs of these people, because these people essentially work as the bank for building financing, because when you're a building developer and you go to the bank and you say, I need money to build this building, they go, how many pre-sales do you have? Because they need to see that you have pre-sales to build this, and then the funding is basically based around that. So these buildings don't get built without investors, without the pre-sale people, because a lot of home buyers are too scared, or maybe don't necessarily have the money all the time, to just be putting it up front for these buildings to get built. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. You need the investors to get the buildings built, but at the same time, then the buildings get more expensive. We'll get into more of that later.
Is usually to cover their monthly mortgage payments by renting it out. For decades, this was considered a pretty smart move. Condos were cheap relative to every other kind of property, but their value was rising, and the average rent that landlords could charge tenants was rising steadily too. But now?
It's changed quite drastically. I mean, anecdotally, with my own investors, I shy away from new condos just because of the numbers just don't really make any sense.
Yes, the numbers don't.
I don't like buying new anything. I generally don't even tell clients or people, friends, family, whatever. I say I don't love new builds because you're signing a contract for a building you've never seen. You don't know the quality that it's going to be built. You don't know all of that stuff. You're kind of just getting, you can see the plans, you can see the model home, but that's not the house you're getting. I much prefer, and I strongly suggest you always walk through the building ideally you're going to buy.
Makes sense, which has led to an insane number of condos being put up for sale, flooding the market in a way we haven't really seen before. I'll show you what I mean. Let's compare what a condo investment in Toronto looked like in 2016 to today. So according to the Toronto Real Estate Board, the average price of a one-bedroom condo back then in 2016 was about $300,000. And with 2016 interest rates, about 2.7%, that worked out to a mortgage payment of about $1,100 a month. Rent for the average one-bedroom apartment at that time was about $1,660. Not bad from an investor point of view. Even with maintenance fees, property taxes, that condo is essentially paying for itself while you build equity. Now, what if you were to buy a one-bedroom condo today in Toronto? That could cost you about $550,000. So prices have very clearly gone up, but so have interest rates. The carrying costs on a property are far higher than they ever used to be.
Yeah, so basically he's right. Prices have gone up 550 from 300,000. Not only that, these units have gotten much smaller. You can't see my mouse cursor, but the 300,000 unit, it was usually bigger than the 550. So not only is the 550 more expensive, it's also smaller. And then I didn't like the interest rates that he chose here. Like 2.7% in 2016 is a little low. It should probably be a little bit higher, especially if you're going to do fixed. And then 6.8 if you're doing fixed in 2024 is pretty high as well. I mean, people are getting fixed at like 5.4 right now. So I don't know. He's definitely doing a range for the interest rates, because we know our boy Andy Chang likes his little sneaky stuff in the background to make the stuff look worse. Everything he said here on principle is correct, but I don't love the numbers, guys.
Well, not ever, but in recent memory. At current rates, 6.8%. Maybe now you're paying more than $3,000 a month for your mortgage payment alone. Then you've got, property taxes, maintenance fees, and the average rent for a unit like that, about $2,400 a month. You're now paying out of pocket.
The average investor is going to be short about $1,000 a month now, right? And that's a tough pill to swallow.
So jack up the rent, right? Well, it's not that easy. Paying more than $3,000 a month for a one-bedroom just isn't possible for most people. The market can only bear so much.
No one will pay the rent that would allow you not to go broke owning that property.
An analyst we spoke to say they're seeing...
We've talked about Ron before. That guy is the weirdest guy. He's a mortgage broker in Canada who hates... He has to be the biggest Canadian real estate hater that is all over media, and he's a mortgage broker. I don't know what's going on.
More and more people leaving the rental market in Toronto because things are already too expensive. So they move back in with family or they couch surf. Now, historically, the average investor might try to stick this kind of thing out because the assumption has always been, even if you're losing money in the short term, in the long run, you'll still come out on top.
A lot of investors would have had no problem being short $1,000 a month if their unit's going up by 10 grand a month, you know what I mean? Or 7 grand a month in terms of appreciation. But that's not happening.
Over the past couple of
Yeah, and again, it doesn't have to be as drastic as he said with the numbers. So if you're losing $1,000 a month, which is a horrible way to plan your investing, but let's say you're in a situation where you're losing $1,000 a month. Generally speaking, if you bought the condo at $550 on the low end, you would expect 3% appreciation, which would be like 16,500. So if you're out 12, you're up 16.5, netting 4.5, which means like the investment is still worth it because then you're still getting mortgage pay down on top of that, you know, another 2%, let's say another 10 grand. So you could say like, oh, I'm paying $1,000 a month, but I'm making 15 grand a year in total building operations. And you are protecting your money because, as we've talked about, guys, the central bank is printing money. The government is spending. That is devaluing your dollar. If you guys care enough, we can talk about that more. You guys never talk about the dollar stuff or care about it in the comments. But our money's being destroyed, so you kind of have to buy hard assets anyways.
years, condo prices in many big cities have more or less stalled. And in some cases, depending on when these people bought, their investments might already have lost value. Condo prices.
Yeah, and that's a bigger issue why we were saying about the less buildings will get built if the investors are not able to sell, because these builders have all of their building and financing. And I understand some people are going to say, well, the prices just have to come low enough for the average people to be able to afford it. But the builders just won't build. And if prices come down enough, then that means we're going to be in some level of contraction or recession anyways. So I actually see this as being a net negative for the whole country. I don't want prices to continue to go up, obviously, because that's nuts. But if investors keep losing money and people stop buying, buildings will continue to not get built, which means the housing crisis will, especially if we don't cut immigration, get much worse. And then that's not good for anybody. So
in Toronto, for example, skyrocketed between 2017 and 2022. This was great for investors, but many wondered if they were actually becoming overvalued, if there were too many of these condos being built to sustain these prices. At the end of 2022, those prices started to drop, which is especially bad news for investors who've bought since then.
Now the renewal has come in and you're losing a lot of money, but you've actually come to realize in the last 12 months, the price of that condo has probably dropped about $40,000. So you're starting to enter into a state of actual fear.
So no wonder.
I hate when they take these guys out of context. Like, I really don't love Ron when he says his stuff. Like, I got to talk to him sometime. I don't know, because I don't like what he says, but like he was talking about renewals there, which has nothing to do with what these guys are talking about right now, because he was talking about new investors who bought since the changes and these prices. So I don't know. They're using them out of context for sure. Maybe a classic little CBC move with our boy Andy Changathan.
You have so many mom and pop landlords now saying, enough is enough. I'm going to try to sell before I lose any more money. But there's also another group of investors, the pre-construction buyers. And for a lot of them, things are even more dire.
There's some buildings where up to as many as 12 or 15% of the buyers are saying, no, I'm not going to close. Okay, I'm walking away from my deposit.
In the past, in a city like...
So, as I said, these people are usually the ones who help the builders get financing. However, those were also the speculators those ones are the ones that I have the problem with. So I really want to make some clarity here. If you are an investor who intends on closing on the property, keeping it as a rental, but you're buying it and closing on it, no problem. If you are a speculator who is just throwing a down payment on, I've heard stories of people getting lines of credit to just put the deposit down because they think they're going to flip and assign the unit before it closes. If you have no intention of closing and you're just speculating and you're just trying to scalp, you're basically a condo scalper instead of a ticket scalper. If you're one of those investors, oh, I hope you get, I don't want to wish anything bad, but you stop doing it, because you know what? Stop doing it.
Like Toronto, you could pretty reliably put money down on a pre-construction condo, wait 2 to 5 years till it was built, and then sell that unit before anyone ever moved in.
Yeah.
In most cases, the value of that investment would go up 20, 30, even 40% without you having to do much at all.
From the year 2000 through to, right about to 2020, that was true. But now it's not true. That's absolutely not true.
So these units are completing and they're not worth what the investors paid for them, right? So they paid $1,500 a square foot, but they're only worth $1,300 a square foot.
Yeah, and also, guys, you should see the numbers on what the development fees are on these condos. Like, on these condos now, the development fees are in the 6 figures per unit, which means, yeah, sure, these prices are coming down, but they can only come down so low when the baseline cost is like $130,000 per unit, not including building cost, developing everything, just in development fees.
So some investors are trying to bail on a bad investment. Some can't afford the carrying costs, and lots of them are all in this situation at the same time. So you end up with a flood of condos on the market. But isn't that the very definition of a buyer's market? Like, isn't this great news for people who want to jump in? Well, it would be if these condos had actually been built for the people looking to buy. According to StatsCan, the average size of a new condo in Toronto has shrunk significantly over time. From 1981 to 1990, new condos were on average about 1,000 square feet. From 2016 to 2020, they were around 650 square feet, or about 40% smaller. And if you ask anyone who lives in the downtown core right now, 650 square feet actually feels pretty big.
This is what a 275 square foot condominium looks like in downtown Toronto.
Look how small this bedroom is in this Toronto condo for sale that I was showing.
This is the den. This little cutout in the wall is the den, okay? Doesn't even fit an entire table.
And yes, Toronto is definitely an extreme example here. But the analysts we spoke to say these tiny units have become more and more common since the early 2000s right across the country. And developing these smaller condos targeted specifically at investors who then turn them around for rent, that was a real business opportunity.
It's tough because you got to find the balance, because if these people were actually planning on being good investors who wanted good units and long-term tenants who cared, you wouldn't buy a 270-foot unit, because you'd know, like, my renter is going to be pretty limited for those types of units, and like you're kind of not setting yourself up for success. So I don't even like the idea of that.
We needed rental housing. So basically what happened is like that was filled by mom and pop investors buying condominiums and converting them to rentals.
They only had one single thing in mind, that they would be purchased by people who would be landlords.
Investors want small units. The yield is better. The price is lower. It's easier to qualify.
According to realtors, it's these teeny tiny investment condos that are currently flooding the market in places like the Greater Toronto area.
Broadly in the GTA, we're looking at over 13,000. Majority of these suites are investor units that are listed for sale.
And if you think about it, if those condos were built for investors, just renting them out or flipping them, the focus probably wasn't on quality or functionality or families. Some of these places don't even have closets. According to the realtors we spoke to, investors aren't generally very choosy about whether the floor plan works, whether the finishes are first rate, or what the view looks like, because they have no intention of moving in. They just want the best value for their money. But if someone's taking their entire life savings and putting it into a home that they plan to live in for years, that's a pretty different story.
Surprise, surprise, they never reached out to me. Come on, CBC, you know I'm a real estate agent. why aren't you reaching out to me for my opinions and analysis? Because for me, even as an investor, and my clients who are often investors, is we do buildings that we know are going to have a variety of rental options. We know they're going to be high quality because as an investor, you want to buy a building that is going to be the lowest amount of headache, the lowest amount of turnover, the lowest amount of problems, and generally, the better the unit, the higher quality the tenant. So buying these crappy units that you can hopefully stuff somebody in for maximum rent, and if it sits, empty for a month, you lose all this money. It's not the way that I would normally tell people to do it.
There was absolutely no thought given to the idea that anyone would buy that place, that sub 500 square foot condo, as a place to permanently live.
Right now, for example, in Toronto and Vancouver, 3/4 of larger condos, the ones, maybe more suitable for a family, built decades ago, those are being lived in by the people who own them. But for those much smaller condos, built after 2016, with investors in mind, only about half are being lived in by owners. Remember that cute little studio that we showed you at the start that took 400 some days to sell? It was 330 square feet. Here's a 2-bedroom, 700 square foot unit in that same building. It sold earlier this month on the first try in just 13 days.
If we look at the large...
They didn't say the price. Maybe they really priced it aggressively, but I mean, they are selling better if you have, a couple can buy it and they, have the space, and it does sell faster for sure, but you didn't say the price. So
cohort of buyers right now, they're predominantly millennials that are looking to enter the market. If you're looking to start a family, it's really tough to start a family in a 1-bedroom condo. Or even if you don't have a family, if you are a millennial and you're a couple, let's say you have a dog, or if you work from home, you need that additional space to be able to either work or raise a family or even just have a guest bedroom. So when we look at the amount of inventory that's available, there's just really nothing. There aren't a lot of options out there.
What ended up happening is we only built one kind of product for the last 5 years. And it's
yeah, and single-family homes are going to become like unicorns all the way across the country. Canada's single-family home starts are in the absolute dumpsters right now. We are basically seeing a fraction of everything else that's being built as single-family homes. So you're going to get these skyboxes, but that's why I said at the beginning of this video, this is so important for us to pay attention to, because if these condos aren't selling, these investors won't make money, less buildings will be built, but also there's less money being created in the real estate market for people to trade up into bigger buildings. So potentially less of the single family homes are going to be built. And this dynamic here, one, could make prices worse, but two, could be a crash would make things worse, because then less stuff would be built from the crash and people would be losing their jobs and all this stuff. It's this is worth paying attention to.
It's possible when you only build one product that it can become mispriced. And that's what we're faced with right now.
This one's asking price is $420,000. For that price, would you live in this bunk bed?
The analysts we spoke to all said they do expect the price of these smaller units to come down over the next 6 months or so. That doesn't make them any more ideal a place to start a family. But if the price made more sense, that takes some of the sting off, right?
I think they call that the bullwhip effect, when basically prices for something continue to increase and then it's overbuilt and then, price whips back down because the supply is too much. I think it's called the bullwhip effect. I think it's an economic term. If you are an economist watching this, comment that down below if I'm right or if I'm wrong, because I'm okay with being wrong. I just don't want to lie to you guys. So thank you guys so much for watching. Buy the Axe Attack shirts, and I do appreciate all your comments. Everybody who watches to the end, you guys rock. I see your comments when I know you're commenting from the end of the video, so thank you so much. I appreciate it. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and have a great rest of your day.